Hi, my name is Stefano Fasciani, and I am an associate professor at the Department of Musicology of the University of Oslo. In this video, I will provide you an introduction to network-based collaborative music making. In particular, I refer to the use of the internet or of any computer network to which two or more people are connected to play, jam, compose, or produce music either synchronously or asynchronously. This can be very useful when we cannot meet each other physically for a variety of reasons, for instance, distance, or because we cannot really move large and bulky equipment, or when we can't leave our home for any other reason. The focus here is on collaboration over the internet, and therefore I will not talk about system or technologies for streaming, for broadcasting over the internet, or for online music distribution. I will try to keep the technical language as simple as possible and explain all the technical concepts so that you can follow this introduction even if you don't have an expertise in music technology and in computer networks. I will present several techniques and technologies and a few selected applications. I want to clarify that I don't have any affiliation with the institutions and companies that develop these tools. Moreover, the video is not meant to be a comprehensive survey. In the description of this video, you'll find a link to a web page that contains all the references cited in this video, additional resources, and a more extensive list of tools for network music making. If you think that there is something missing, write it in the comment and I will add it to the list. This video is organized in 3 segments. In the first, there is a brief introduction and history to the internet and to music with computer networks. In the second segment, I'll talk about the requirement for playing music together over the network and the technical characteristics of the network itself. And in the last segment, I'll talk about different network-based music applications. In the description, you find timestamps, so you can directly skip to the section you're more interested in. In The Origin of the Species, Charles Darwin stated that only those that are capable to adapt to the changing environment will survive. This applies to musicians as well. There are plenty of opportunities out there in the world of the computer network and the internet. We should learn to exploit and take advantage of these opportunities, because one day this one may determine who will make it and who will perish. Musicians have a great ability in adapting to the changing environment and in taking opportunities out of new technologies not designed for them. Think about the computers that were introduced in the 40s and in the 50s as tools for fast and accurate calculation. They were never meant to be musical instruments, but today computers are ubiquitous in music. Think about studio and think about performances and instruments that are purely computer-based. Musical experimentation with computers started in the 60s, when the interfaces and the computational capabilities of computer were not comparable with what we have today. At that time, computers were not capable of running musical algorithms in real time. Programming was very user-unfriendly, command line, punch cards, and so on, but this did not prevent musicians to take advantage of this great technological introduction. Since we're talking about the internet and computer networks, it's important that we clarify what is a network. A network is any structure composed by nodes, represented by the circle, and the links that connect the node. This can be an electrical network to distribute power, electrical power, or a computer network that distributes data. The nodes are in charge of routing the data, but they can also be the point in which the data is produced or consumed, so we may have servers or clients. Instead, the links exchange the data across the nodes. This exchange can happen through wires or wireless connection. Any pair of nodes within the same network can exchange data, even if they're very remote. Links are usually shared across users, and in general, multiple paths exist between any two nodes. For instance, if the shortest path is unavailable or overloaded with traffic, it is possible to transmit information through an alternative path. Here, there are milestones in the development of computer networks that led to the modern internet. SAGE and OGAS can be considered product of the Cold War. Indeed, they were meant to interconnect computer network within the defense system of the United States and the Soviet Union. Most innovation that gave us as a result the modern internet were developed within the Advanced Research Projects Agency network, ARPANET, for instance email, FTP, TCP/IP protocol, and so on. The aim of ARPANET was to interconnect existing computer networks within research institutions, for instance universities, and defense agencies. They also introduced the packet switching technology, which is a significant advancement from the circuit switching technology, which was common in the old school telephony. Packet switching allows concurrent sharing of the network links. In the mid-80s, research and defense network were separated. The research network started to expand globally, and in the 90s, ISP, Internet Service Provider, started to proliferate, allowing the general public to use this global system of interconnected computer networks based on TCP/IP that, for simplicity, we call the Internet. This is a snapshot of ARPANET back in 1977. You may recognize some places. For instance, we have Stanford on the left, which correspond to the West Coast, and on the right you may recognize NYU and Harvard, as well as the Pentagon in the bottom right of the topological map. From this timeline, it's possible to see how most of the internet tech giants started to proliferate right after ISP allowed the general public to access the internet, and this one, as said before, happened in the 90s. Today, in 2020, we have a population of 7.8 billion people, out of which 4.5 billion people use the internet on a daily basis, which account for approximately 58%. If we look at only developed country, this one account for about 90% of the population. Therefore, the outreach of the internet is truly global. The National Research and Education Network still exists, they're still there. They provide specialized communication and also data services for the need of research and education communities within a country. They're usually supported by a high-speed backbone network, which can offer dedicated communication channels for individual research projects. These networks are usually interconnected and also coordinated at continental level. For instance, in Europe we have GEAN, and further connected globally. This is a significant difference. If two nodes are connected to the research network, they can have a guaranteed bandwidth between them. Performances are guaranteed at all time. While if two nodes are connected through commercial ISP, what you usually negotiate with your ISP is not guaranteed at all time. Commercial networks are usually dimensioned based on usage patterns. So it's possible for you to find the network busy or the service not available. Think about mobile phone networks when you go to a very crowded place or when you try to call at peak time. For network music performances in which we play in real time with someone else over the network, it's very important to use a reliable network that can give us the performances that we're expecting, especially if there is an audience involved. Very often we end up using the research network, also because this service can be customized to provide stable bandwidth, but also very little latency. That is something very important on which we will discuss later. The first composition and performance that included a remote component was the Imaginary Landscape No. 4 by John Cage from 1951. That was a piece for 24 performers and 12 radios. This is not a real network-based music performance. There is no collaborative remote element. On the other side, we can think that the radio broadcaster were not aware about being part of a piece being performed by someone, somewhere. This piece is also, it has a score and visual cues for the performers. The visual cues are about what station they have to tune on. And the interesting part is that this piece is dynamic in time and in space, because every time it's performed in a different epoch and in a different venue, the sonic result will be different, because what is broadcasted through the radio will be different. This is an excerpt of this piece performed on the 20th of November 2011 by the students of the Victoria Conservatoire of Music in Canada with Bradford Werner. The League of Automatic Music Composers pioneered the use of computers in live performances under several aspects and created avant-garde music of rare and distinctive beauty. The League used the Kim 1, the first mass-marketed microcomputer released in 1976. When performing, they sent data messages between each other computer with the goal of influencing their playing. The League was the first live computer music band whose members were all composers as well as designers and builders of their hardware and software. This was very common in the San Francisco Bay Area at that time. The Bay actually has a strong tradition of music instrument building, live performances, and multimedia collaboration. The musical task carried out by each computer, as well as the signal that they exchange, are illustrated in the flyer of their performance. In 1986, they replaced the ad hoc wire connection with a hub, which is a general-purpose connection device for network data. The adoption of a standardized connection between their device solved many problems. For instance, provided less error-prone connection and provided greater collaboration capabilities. In 1986, 3 members of the League founded another group, the Hub, which in 1987 performed the first ever telematic music performance in New York. The performance involved 2 trios, one in the clock tower and the other in the experimental intermedia center. The connection was established using a standard modem over phone line, and they only exchanged messages to control each other computer. No audio signal was exchanged over this connection, also because at that time the available bandwidth was fairly limited. This is an excerpt of Farabi, a piece in the album The Hub by The Hub, released in 1989. According to Tim Perkis, the leader of The Hub, setting up such a telematic performance was a huge technical effort. Keep in mind that this one happened years before the proliferation of the internet. But he also stated that the emphasis has been on connection between musicians, the excitement of using computers to define a new social context for music making, as well as exploring the possibility of a system too complex for direct control. Things got much easier after the introduction of MIDI, a standard communication protocol for digital musical instrument. Indeed, also the Hub switched to MIDI in the 90s. Another early example of network music performance is the Transatlantic Concert of 1992, with 4 musicians, Risset and Rioli in Nice, and Rosenbloom and Subtonic in Los Angeles. For this performance, they used the Yamaha Disclavier, which is a piano augmented with sensors and actuator, which can capture locally and reproduce remotely the act of playing. The connection was based on satellite links, which were fairly expensive and fairly slow. The delay between the 2 venues were approximately 250 milliseconds. Due to the expenses, the concert was not replicated. Since 2004, Yamaha decided to integrate in the Disclavier an internet interface to streamline the process of playing this instrument across remote locations. If you're not familiar with this instrument, Here is the disc clavier in action. In this second segment, I will discuss the requirement for playing music together and how this translates into requirement and characteristic of the network. When it comes to network-based music application, there is a very interesting taxonomy proposed by Barbosa back in 2003. The applications are classified based on their location or space, so we can be playing music in the same place, so co-located, or in remote location, and the interaction, which is somehow related to time. We can be playing music together at the same time, synchronously, or we may be working on music at different times, so asynchronously. In the third segment of this video, I will discuss about applications that fall into each of the four quadrants that we have here. As you can guess, playing music synchronously from remote locations presents the greatest technical challenges. In this segment, I will mostly refer to the requirements and characteristics for this type of network-based musical application. In the ecosystem of music performances, we have many actors. We have, of course, the musicians, performers, maybe a conductor, audio engineers, other people playing live electronics, and of course the audience. To different extents, and depending on the context, these actors interact with each other. Usually they are co-located in the same physical space. The idea of network-based music performances is to distribute them across remote location and interconnect them, so each actor or group of actors represent a node of a computer network. Here is an example of a network music performance. The piece is called Renditions 3, composed by Alain Renaud in 2012, and it's performed on the 18th of April 2012 in 3 locations: the Bournemouth University, Queen's University Belfast, and Stanford University. The piece features 3 performers in 3 different locations with audience in each location. There are also elements of live electronics, spatial audio, sonic visualization, and dynamic graphical score generation. This piece was actually composed to be played over the network. There are a lot of things that may be very challenging to do over the network if we are placed in remote locations. But on the other side, the network also offers great opportunities that we don't have if playing in the same physical space. So in network music performance, we enable a musician in remote geographical location to play and perform together, to interact as if they were in the same space through computer and telecommunication networks. In order to do that, we must provide musicians a realistic performance condition and therefore a fully immersive virtual space. Technologies for network music performances does not apply only to concert, but we can use the same system for teleauditions, remote music teaching that is extremely important for remote geographical location where there's actually no teachers. We can also use it for rehearsal, minimizing the cost and also the environmental impact of traveling, and also distributed jam sessions. Now, let's have a look at which are the requirements for playing music together if we are considering to use traditional acoustic instruments. So if we play music in the same room, we rely on several modalities, on auditory information and also on visual information or visual cues. In particular, we hear the sound of an instrument, we hear what someone else is playing and when. Through the reverberation, we may have an idea about where this instrument is located within the room, especially if we have multiple instruments that are present in the same timbre. And we also use visual feedback to understand what is about to happen. If you think about the video that we just saw, the network music performance, at the beginning the players, they look at each other to say, okay, we're ready to play. And visual cues are almost as important as auditory cue, and it's also important to provide them this sense of immersion and telepresence. As briefly mentioned before, this one translates into a set of very demanding and strict requirements with respect to the computer network, especially with respect to the bandwidth, latency, and jitter. If you're not familiar with this term, we will see next what do they mean. But long story short, we need that the one-way end-to-end transmission of the audio and video signals is below a few tenths of milliseconds. Moreover, using the best of what is available today is not yet possible to reproduce all the details of physical presence in the virtual network space. Probably one day this one will happen. Think about technologies related to holograms or virtual reality. Things has improved so quickly in the last 20 years, so it is not unreasonable to imagine that in a couple of decades we will probably get something much better, and the sense of co-presence through the network will be identical of the one that we have when we play in the same physical room. Generally, when we play music together, we play in sync. This one may vary to a great extent depending on the individual style and the music genre that we're playing. The concept of tempo may be more strict in certain genres and way more relaxed in other. The ensemble performance threshold, or EPT, is the maximum delay that allows musicians to play in sync, so aligned to the same metronome. This maximum distance is estimated to be roughly 8 to 9 meters, which correspond to a delay of 20 to 30 milliseconds. The EPT varies a lot with the ability of the musician as well, the stylistic expression, strategies to cope with the delay. If we consider, for instance, computer-based instrument, there is already a significant delay between action and sonic reaction of the instrument. Here we are considering bilateral communication and therefore listening to the reaction of another musician to our own act of playing. Let's assume that there is a violin player and a saxophone player. They're separated by about 8 meters, and therefore there is an acoustic propagation delay of 20 milliseconds. So it takes 20 milliseconds for the violin player sound to reach the saxophone player, which will play something else. And this one will take another 20 milliseconds to reach back the violin player. So the round trip is roughly 40 milliseconds. We can tolerate delays of maximum 40 to 60 milliseconds. We can still cope with this. If this delay gets larger than 60 milliseconds, it gets very, very difficult to play in sync, and we need to seek for different strategies. Here there are two emulated examples. In the first one, there is a bass drum player and another player playing the close hi-hat. I've placed them at 4 different distances corresponding to 0 milliseconds of round trip delay, 10 milliseconds, 20 milliseconds, and 40 milliseconds. The listener is co-located with a bass drum player. the temporal misalignment is already evident with a delay of only 10 milliseconds. Now let's listen to another example in which there are two different instruments involved, an organ and a flute. In this second example, the misalignment is less evident, it's less, let's say, disturbing, simply because the timbre of this instrument is different, and in particular the attack is less sharp on the organ and on the flute. Another factor that may also affect to what extent we perceive this misalignment is the tempo, which was set to 120 BPM in these two examples, so it was identical. So for network music performances involving acoustic instrument, we need to be at a distance of maximum 20 to 30 milliseconds, so that the round trip is within 40 to 60 milliseconds. But what about when we perform over the network using live electronics, and therefore electronic music instruments or computers? Well, this is very difficult to generalize, because these tools can be used for a variety of purposes. First of all, we need to consider what is the role of the computer and what type of interaction exists between the computer and the performer. And this can change greatly between two extremes, which are using the computer as a meta instrument, perhaps with a dedicated interface. And so we can think about the computer as an acoustic-like musical instrument. On the other side, we can use the computer as a set of automatically sequenced instruments, and therefore there is the same relationship between a director and an orchestra, so we're directing a digital orchestra. Something else that has to be considered in order to understand which are the requirements is how and where the sound is reproduced and how it is transmitted. And this, once again, may change between two different extremes. We may have an individual speaker co-located with each performer, and therefore there is acoustic transmission of the sound, something similar to what happened in the laptop orchestras. Or the different audio signal may be transmitted electrically at a much faster speed and merge into common speakers. So if we look at one end of this very broad and variegated spectrum, considering everything written in red, we have a similar scenario to the one that we discussed before, playing acoustic instrument, and therefore we go back to the same requirement, those 40 to 60 milliseconds. On the other end, the scenario is completely different. We may rely on synchronization technologies, and the delay is also less critical because the way we interact with a sequencer or with, for instance, digital audio workstations in real time is very different from the way we need to interact with the actual instruments. Several live electronic performances purely based on computer translates very well over the network. It's very easy to perform across remote location. For instance, if we think about top lab performances, live coding, and so on. And we can rely on a variety of existing techniques for synchronization. For instance, we can import and adopt a lot of these techniques from the gaming world. Let's move to the second part of this second segment of the video. Here, I will discuss about technical characteristics of the network and also of other type of equipment that we need to play music over the network. And we will see how the requirement that we discussed in the first part translate into technical requirement for the network. Earlier, I mentioned bandwidth, latency, and jitter. We can talk about these three characteristics for all components of a computer system and also for telecommunication system. The bandwidth, or throughput, is the total amount of work done in a given time. Usually is expressed in something per second. Think about megabit per second, gigabit per second that we use to measure the bandwidth of hard disk, computer networks, and so on. When it comes to processors for your mobile phone or for your PC, we use gigahertz, which kind of translates in billions of operations per second. The latency is the response time, so the time between the beginning and the completion of a given task or event. and it's usually measured in seconds or milliseconds if it's something very small. Using colloquial language, when we refer to hardware, we talk about speed, but is the speed related to the bandwidth or to the latency? It kind of depends what we're talking about, but let's say that in general, it can be more closely related to the latency. Knowing the latency of hardware system, especially in this context, it's vital, it's very important. And this is very tricky, it's very difficult. The manufacturer very often do not provide any clear information about the latency. Measuring latency is very difficult, and therefore we are left in a sort of like limbo because we really don't know what to expect from a given system unless we try it out. And finally, we have the jitter. That is a positive or negative variation of the latency, which usually presents two components, one deterministic and bounded, and the other one random. Now let's try to be network specific. So the bandwidth measures the amount of data that we can send over a unit of time, so megabit or gigabits per second. Sometimes you may use bytes, is less common for network, but remember that 1 byte is equivalent to 8 bits, so it's very easy to convert back and forward between bytes per second and bits per second. Now, usually through the network we send packets of data, and there's a variety of data packets that we can send, and this is out of the scope of this video. But in general, the latency measures the time for a data packet to reach from the sender to the receiver, and we usually measure it in milliseconds. Finally, the jitter is a probabilistic variation of the latency. Here, there is an illustration of a very simple example of network transmission. A sender transmits 3 packets, named 1, 2, and 3. Let's assume that these packets are transmitted within 1 second. And we have a network with a bandwidth of 100 packets per second. So we're sending 3 packets over a second. So the network bandwidth is capable to handle the traffic that we are producing. And between sender and receiver, we have a latency of 10 milliseconds. So packet number 1 will reach the receiver after 10 milliseconds. But as you can see from this illustration, there may be a little bit of jitter. So packet number 2 is affected by 50% jitter. So instead of reaching the receiver within 10 milliseconds, it will reach within 15 milliseconds. Now, the bandwidth is something that usually we negotiate with our internet service provider, but as stated before, if you're using, let's say, a consumer network, that bandwidth is not guaranteed at all time. The latency truly depends on who you're trying to reach. And the jitter may depend on the traffic, and therefore you need to try to estimate how many people are using the network at the same time as you're doing, which is actually fairly difficult. Can we tolerate the jitter? It really depends on the application. If you're downloading a file, it's totally fine. It's not a big deal. But imagine that each packet contains, let's say, 1 second of audio, and you're streaming an audio signal through the network. If a packet arrives a little bit too early, it's fine. You can wait before play back that second of audio. But what if a packet arrives late? How can you predict the content of that packet? There is no way. The only way is to introduce a buffer, which means let's accumulate a little bit of data before we begin the playback. And buffering simply means increasing the delay, increasing the latency. Think about when you're watching a video online. You click play, the playback does not start immediately. Usually you receive a message that says buffering. They're buffering packets to handle the jitter. If you don't do this, the playback may be continuously interrupted because there is nothing to play back, and therefore the quality of service will be very poor. So let's try to put everything together. What is the impact of the requirements for playing music together against the performance parameters of a computer network? The bandwidth will only determine the quality and quantity of audio and video signals that we are transmitting and receiving. For instance, for each channel of uncompressed audio, we need 768 megabit per second using a sampling rate of 48 kilohertz. So for stereo, you need the double of this. If you want to send a stream of audio signal before mixing them, you need way more than this. On the other side, for performances completely based on computer and electronic music instrument, we can think about only transmitting MIDI or open sound control messages. Therefore, the bandwidth requirement is minimized because we are not transmitting audio, but only control messages, and the audio will be resynthesized at the other end of the network. Something similar to what the hub did back in the 80s. When it comes to the video, for instance, for a color Full HD 30 frames per second, we need almost 1.5 gigabit per second if the video is uncompressed. The bandwidth is something that you can buy, you can actually negotiate with your ISP. But there is nothing much that you can do about the latency of the network. And as you may understand, the latency determines a delay between hearing each other when playing in remote location. And therefore this one will have an impact on the capability of playing in sync. Finally, to handle the jitter, we need to add some buffering, which will give us further delay in the network transmission. So in general, the bandwidth is very important, but it doesn't matter how much bandwidth you have. If the latency is too high, it is not possible, or it is very difficult to play music in sync. But it's also possible to rethink about the way we play music. There are strategies, as we will see in the third segment, to play even in presence of very high delays. So the bandwidth is something that we can actually buy. We can negotiate it with our ISP, internet service provider, within, let's say, reasonable and given limitation, or we can actually think about decreasing the quality of our audio and video signals. But when it comes to the latency, there's very little that we can do. We don't even know who we should talk about if we want to reduce the latency, because there are so many different stakeholders involved in the internet, especially if we are playing across very remote locations. So the latency in this context is even more important than the bandwidth. The performances of different components of computer systems, including the network, has significantly improved over the last 4 decades. Think about the bandwidth of your internet connection in the early 90s, 56 kilobit per second. Today, we are in the range of tens of megabit per second, so there was a huge improvement. But what about the latency? As you can see from the diagram on the left and the table on the right, the latency did not improve as much as the bandwidth. We had 30 times improvement in terms of latency, so things get 30 times faster, while in the same period of time, the bandwidth improved by 10,000 times. From the hardware point of view, and this applies across the spectrum of hardware devices, reducing the latency is way more challenging and expensive than increasing the bandwidth. Very simple example, if you want to increase the bandwidth of a link, you can simply run more cables. But if you want to improve the speed and therefore reduce the latency, it's a completely different story. You need to find a way for the data to travel much faster along these cables. Moreover, when it comes to the speed, there are barriers that we cannot overcome, which are set by the law of physics. So earlier, we discussed that we need the round-trip delay to be within the 40 to 60 milliseconds, and therefore the one-way transmission, so the latency of the network, should be within 20 to 30 milliseconds. So let's assume that I want to play music with someone else in another place of the world, and I'm based here in the University of Oslo. And let's assume an ideal connection between these two venues. So there is no routers, switches, and any other network device. I'm just running a dedicated fiber between me and another person in another place of the world. And let's also assume that the speed of the data into the fiber travel as fast as the speed of light. These assumptions are fairly unrealistic. Today, the speed of light in optic fiber is approximately 2/3 of the speed of light. And whenever we use the network between two endpoints, there are multiple switches and routers. And therefore, each of these nodes provide a little but additional amount of latency. On the map, the red pointer represents where I am, the University of Oslo. And then there are 3 regions. One within a delay of 10 milliseconds, which correspond to approximately 3,000 kilometers. One within 20 milliseconds, and another one within 30 milliseconds. As you can imagine, if I want to play with someone in Argentina, I won't be able to do it within the ensemble performance threshold. because the latency will be exceeding the total 60 milliseconds for the round trip. Moreover, if you take the two most distant points on the globe that, not surprisingly, are on the equator, these are 20,000 kilometers apart, 67 milliseconds. So it's not possible to play music synchronously between any two places on the globe. In reality, the radius of these three concentric regions will be way smaller. Don't forget that here we assume propagation at the speed of light, and we assume no additional delay within the network, and we're not even considering any other delay that would be given by the audio and video equipment that we're using at the transmission and receiver point. In general, the closer you are geographically, the less latency you will experience, and a general rule is that if you want to play synchronously over the network, the distance should not be exceeding 2,000 kilometers. But once again, there are techniques and strategies that we can use to deal with latencies exceeding the ensemble performance threshold, and we can also think about composing music for the network, therefore for an ensemble that is experiencing high latencies between the players. So let's try to be a little bit more practical here. Let's say that you want to play music with someone else over the network, and you want to do this one synchronously, and you want to estimate how much bandwidth is available between the two of you and what is the latency that the network will give you. We will stick to the two-point connection, so a point-to-point or peer-to-peer connection, because this is fairly easy to implement and quite straightforward. If you want to have a three-point connection or more, this one is much more difficult. We may use dedicated software that they're still in a kind of like a preliminary development phase, or we can implement, for instance, a three-point connection using multiple two-point connections, but this one is quite challenging and it significantly increases the required bandwidth. So first of all, you want to use one of those websites that measure the speed of your internet connection. As discussed before, you're not really measuring the speed, you're measuring the bandwidth. When you measure the bandwidth, you get two numbers, one for the upload and one for the download. Usually the upload bandwidth is way smaller than the download bandwidth. This one because usually at home, let's say we download more than uploading. But here the upload is as important as the download because I'm assuming that you will be streaming as much data as you're receiving. So look at the smallest number between these two. Then you may want to try to estimate the latency of the network transmission. And you can do this by using the command ping, which is available on the terminal of all operating system. The ping will just send the packet and then the receiver will send it back. And it will measure the round trip time. This is a good estimate of the network latency. To use the ping command, you need to know what is the IP address of the other person you want to play music over the network. Another interesting tool still available over the terminal, so the command line, is traceroute. This one will display all the routers and nodes that are between you and the other party, so you and the IP address that you're trying to reach. The ping command will give you information about how many milliseconds it takes for this round trip, so it's fairly easy to interpret. The response of the traceroute is fairly difficult to interpret and to understand, but there is a great tool, it's called Open Visual Traceroute, that visualizes the information of the returned by the traceroute, showing you on a map all the different locations that the data will travel from the sender to the receiver point, which is quite informative, and it also gives you an estimate of the overall length in kilometers. You find links and additional information about the tools that I've mentioned here for estimating the performances of your network in a web page that is linked in the description of this video. If you do not have sufficient bandwidth, it's always possible to trade a little bit of bandwidth with latency and vice versa. Before I mentioned that you need roughly 1.5 gigabit per second to stream Full HD video, and also 0.7 gigabit per second for each uncompressed audio channel. This is something quite demanding, and it's very unlikely that you have sufficient bandwidth, especially in normal internet connection. But it's always possible for you to compress the audio or the video so that the requirement in terms of bandwidth are significantly reduced. Compressing simply means using codec, co-compression, DEC, decompression, such as the MP3, AAC, and FLAC for the audio, or for the video you may think about MP4 or H.264. Compressing generally may introduce some artifacts, so let's say that the quality drop a little bit, but the advantage is that we significantly reduce the bandwidth. But compressing and decompressing takes time, so we are introducing additional latency in the system. In the example that is illustrated here, you can see how A use more bandwidth, but the overall latency is less because there is no compression and decompression, while in the case B, we are using way less bandwidth, but since we have a compressor and a decompressor at the two ends of the system, the overall latency will be much higher. Generally, for codecs, the latency is something that was never really considered. How good or bad a codec is size versus quality. So the goal of a codec was to reduce the bandwidth. But recently, due to online streaming and live streaming, there is an increasing interest in developing lightweight codec that yet provide good compression, so reduce the bandwidth, but also provide very little latency. And very often these codec rely on additional computing capabilities that are available through the GPU or through dedicated FPGAs. There are many other components that contribute to the latency. The network is probably the one that contribute the most, but we should not forget all the other gears, audio and video gears, that we use for capturing the audio, capturing the video, and then for reproducing it on the other side. In general, the less the better, and analog is faster than digital. These are kind of general rule. We should try to keep the chain between capturing the sound and transmitting it over the network as short as possible. Analog equipment is much faster than digital because there is no need of transcoding or converting the data from digital to analog, and this one take quite some time. Also, using audio processing based on software application running on operating system may introduce even additional latency, but on the other end, using software-based solution or digital solution present a great advantage in terms of flexibility and ease of use. At some point throughout the chain, we need to convert our audio signals into digital signals because we need a computer to transmit this data through the network. That's digital data. But it's recommended that in your entire chain, you have only one conversion stage, one sound card, not multiple. The sound card may contribute with quite some latency, and also the fact that in any DSP audio application, the samples are not processed one at a time, but usually we accumulate a buffer. Very often in your application, you can select the buffer size. In general, the smaller the buffer size, the lower will be the resulting latency of the digital system. In the table on the top right, you can see the resulting latency introduced by the operation of buffering when using 48 kHz as a sampling rate, and there are typical values for buffer size ranging from 32 until 2048. On the receiver side, we need to perform the complementary operation, so we receive digital data in form of network packets. We need to do a little bit of buffering, as discussed before, because jitter may be an issue here. And then we can actually perform our digital audio processing, and then we go through the sound card once again. The I/O buffer size, as stated before, has an impact on the latency, and then we can finally reach the speaker, where the sound is reproduced at the remote location. It's a fairly complicated puzzle to try to keep all this information together and think about what would be the resulting latency. Probably the best approach would be to establish this network connection and to use the same technique that we use in the sonar to measure the latency. So we send a pulse and then we measure how much time does it take to receive it back. To do this, you can simply use a multi-track recorder in which you record simultaneously the audio signal that you're transmitting and what you're receiving back. And then you can do some sort of measurement in any audio editor. So let's go back to the beginning of this segment, the taxonomy proposed by Barbosa. When we play music over computer network synchronously, we may be co-located or remotely located. As discussed before, being remotely located is the most challenging scenario. When co-located, so we are in the same room, in the same building, or let's say not too far apart, we can actually rely on the so-called local area network or LAN, which is a network that interconnects computers within a very limited area. It can be your home, it can be your laboratory, your studio, your building, or your campus. Wireless local area networks are very popular nowadays, but in terms of latency, it's better to stay within the wire connection because if you want to go out of the wire and therefore convert your packet into radio packets, we still need an additional conversion stage. And as stated before, the more conversion stage, the more we add to the latency. Generally, within a local area network, the latency is extremely low. The jitter is negligible. The usage patterns are well known. We can allocate a specific bandwidth between two endpoints, for instance, the two endpoints on which we want to play music, and therefore things are fairly easy. Moreover, today there are existing protocols for efficiently transmit audio, digital audio, over computer network, for instance, AES-50 and Dante, just to mention a few, which interfaces are often provided also in commercial audio equipment. On the other side, we have the wide area network, which let's say is another way to call the internet, where geographical distances are much larger, and at some point we will go through a circuit which has been leased from some telecommunication company that we are sharing with other people, and therefore jitter and latency can be much greater than what we experience on a LAN. In this third and final segment of the video, I will present some of the tools related to the different type of online collaborative music making approaches that we discussed so far. I will also discuss about techniques to cope with network latency, and I will conclude looking at future trends and other practical considerations. Let's go back to the taxonomy proposed by Barbosa and to the diagram in which we have two axes, time and space. The time is related to the interaction and space to the location. The word synchronization is used very often in the world of internet, online, cloud computing. But when it comes to music playing or, for instance, dance, we need a very tight synchronization, and as discussed before, latency is crucial. We discussed that musicians already use the computer for a variety of purposes. We also use the internet almost for everything, downloading, sharing, editing, and so on, but playing online synchronously is not yet so popular. And we can't really use existing video conferencing systems such as Skype and Zoom for doing that because they're not really suitable. Local interconnected musical networks are using organized events for group of performers that interact in real time with a set of musical instruments or virtual musical instruments, software-based, with sonic interdependency that is provided by a local computer network. I will not say much more about this category of application. This is fairly similar to what we discussed before when we play mostly or exclusively using computer, and therefore there are plenty of existing strategy to use computer network to synchronize our system and to exchange audio signals. Perhaps you can have a look at the Wikipedia page on audio over Ethernet, which provide a comprehensive summary of all existing protocols, open and proprietary software, including 3 different layers. So layers that use the Ethernet cable just as a mean of transport, but they don't use any existing network protocols, for instance AES-50, up to layer 2 protocols and layer 3 protocols, where actually the audio data is encapsulated into standard Ethernet packets, for instance AES-51, AES-67, both of them are open, and Dante. Next, I'll tell you something more and I'll show you some example about musical composition support system and also shared sonic environments. And then we will get back to talk about remote music performance system, therefore those systems that enable musicians to play music at the same time over the internet, so from geographically distant location, and therefore enable us to have distributed jam session, teaching, rehearsal, and also, let's say, online distributed concerts. Musical composition support systems are used to assist a more traditional form of musical composition and or production, both for composition based on written music support, so traditional type of support, and also for music production that are based on more experimental processes in recording studio. These systems enhance the traditional collaboration paradigm by allowing geographical displacements and asynchronous type of collaboration. These systems allow you to co-produce or co-compose music with other musicians that may not necessarily be sitting next to you and not necessarily working at the same time as you. Therefore, there is this asynchronous type of collaboration. We can work on the same project at different times. To date, several of these systems has been proposed or introduced. Some of them are based on a sort of like cloud or web-based digital audio workstation, so you're not using your favorite DAW, but you're using a DAW that exists within your browser. Probably one of the earliest proposed system was FMOL, Fast Music Online, by Sergi Jorda in 1997. The project has been discontinued in 2000, but the website is still available, so you can still have a look at it. And probably in 2020, this kind of interface looks a little bit vintage. Other early examples are Rest Rocket Surfer and Tono. Both of them are defunct, and they used to support MIDI only. But there's still plenty of this tool available today. For instance, Audio Tool, Loops Lab, Skytrax, Soundtrap, Home Studio, and BandLab, just to mention a few. I'm pretty sure there are many more out there. All of them present different characteristics. Also, the pricing option may be different, but overall the goal is the same, is to enable collaboration through a cloud-based or a web-based digital audio workstation. Other interesting tools are those inspired and similar to software version control systems. You may have heard about something called CVS, SVN, or the more popular GitHub. These tools allows groups of software developers, sometimes even very large group, to collaborate asynchronously on the same project by forking a project, committing new idea, and merging this new idea into the main branch of the project. Tools like Splice, Blend, and Compose are somehow inspired to this approach. Here you work with your own digital audio workstation, and these systems support the most popular one, for instance, Live, Logic, Studio One, Reaper, and so on. The project is saved into a cloud storage, and then you can make this project available to the general public or only available to your collaborators, and they can at different time asynchronously continue working on the project and then push the updates up to the cloud storage. As in the software control system, the owner of the project can accept or discard these changes, or you can decide also to branch the project into two new projects. An interesting aspect of these tools that is out of the scope of this talk is that they simplify the process of tracing back the ownership within a music composition or a music production, so you can easily visualize who did what and who contributed with what. Another interesting aspect of these tools is that they all provide a virtual community. So if you don't have all the expertise to complete a musical project, you can actually find them online. You can meet new people and you can start to collaborate with them. So they provide you access to this global and international network of musicians, performers, composers, sound engineers, and so on. That can be extremely beneficial. You can seek for their support, or you can offer your support to complete existing project. To make this a bit more clear, next I'll show the first few seconds of the commercial of Compose.
Compose allows you to collaborate with musicians from all over the world to create new, original music. Finish that song you've had in your head or contribute your talent to someone else's song. Work on your own time from your favorite place. If you're new to online collaboration, here's how it works. Let's say you're a guitar player with a great idea for a new song. Record your idea with Pro Tools, Logic Pro, GarageBand, Studio One, or any other audio software. Upload your recorded track to Compose and then invite others to join in. You may get a drummer in France to add a sweet groove to your song. Invite a keyboard player, or maybe a vocalist. Your song will evolve in ways you could never have dreamed, or explore others' songs and jump right in with your ideas.
Finally, other systems may include EarSketch from Georgia Tech, which is an online collaborative music-related coding environment which has been designed for pedagogical purposes. There is also BandHub and Voicey, which are web-based or app-based platform for collaborative music making. When you look at this video, it looks like people are playing synchronously, but actually everyone record and upload his own video. Then the application merged the video into a single one. Next, there is an excerpt of a cover from BandHub of Pink Floyd, Comfortably Numb. Share Sonic Environment is a broad class of applications that explore and exploit the internet distributed and shared nature. They're not oriented towards time-limited events, so we can think about permanent artistic installation, sonic installation, and their use is more suitable for sort of like synchronous improvisation. This system often addresses a very broad audience, and therefore a prior musical knowledge or expertise is generally not required, and often they result in very experimental musical pieces. The type of collaboration can be synchronous, but the time constraints are much more relaxed. Indeed, you can see that from the taxonomy, this category of application are actually quite close to the asynchronous space, and the collaboration may happen locally or remotely. Examples are all those applications based on TransJam, which is a Java-based server allowing users to jam, play music, and also chat online. Another example is the public sound object from the music technology group of UPF, which is a shared sonic space that can be explored simultaneously by community, the online community, so people remotely located behind a browser, or also by people that are visiting the venue in which this installation is displayed. So it brings together the physical and virtual space, and it exploits this possibility that is provided by the internet. Let's go back to the remote music performance systems, those that we started to introduce earlier because extremely challenging from the technical point of view. These are using organized events where there is a group of users performing over the network, usually displays over different geographical location, and they interact synchronously with a set of musical instruments that can be acoustic, electronic, or anything in the between. In these cases, the sonic interdependency between players is severely affected by the network latency. In other words, we are talking about telepresence, so providing the sense of presence using computer networks. The latency introduced by the network is the central issue in this case, unless there is no requirement to play synchronously following a common tempo due to the specific music genre or due to the specific composition. Here we can take 4 different approaches. We can think about developing or adopting technologies that minimize the latency to keep it below the ensemble performance threshold, therefore being at a distance of 25 milliseconds or below, so that the round trip does not exceed those 40 to 60 milliseconds. Here I'm using seconds to measure a distance, which may sound a little bit strange, but indeed the physical distance, it doesn't matter anymore. What it matters is the time that it takes for the sound to reach the other player, so we're just sticking to time. Alternatively, we can develop performing strategies to cope with the latencies that are above the threshold, and it's very likely that musicians will take a little bit of time to get used to this. Alternatively, we can think about the latency as an opportunity rather than a problem. I would like to cite Atao Tanaka, one of the early adopters of network music. He stated that I find internet time delay rather interesting, and I think of it as a kind of unique acoustic of this media. Rather than to play existing music on this new time basis, What is interesting to me is trying to find a musical language that works on this time axis. Finally, we can think about synchronization strategies that normalize the latencies across the players. These 4 scenarios are actually quite well aligned with what Carrot and Werner proposed in 2007. Indeed, minimizing the latency means a realistic interaction approach. There are multiple strategies to cope with the latency: a master-slave approach, a laid-back approach, and a delayed feedback approach. Finding a musical language that works on this time axis, it means latency accepting approaches, and finally, normalizing the latency translating to the fake time approach. Next, we will give a look at all these possible approaches, together with existing tools that facilitate their adoption. The realistic interaction approach aims at keeping the distance between players below the threshold, the ensemble performance threshold, so below 25 milliseconds. In the illustration on the right, the 2 points represent the players, and the concentric circles represent the acoustic wave traveling between each other. It is important to understand this type of illustration because we will see it again later versus the other possible approaches. Most of the systems that fall within this category are the outcome of projects that started in the early 2000s with the advent of the Internet 2 consortium, which is a consortium for non-profit United States computer networking, led by members of research and educational communities, industry, and government. There is very little that can be done to reduce the latency of the network, but a lot can be done to reduce the time that is wasted within the computer system or the hardware system at the transmission and reception point. This is the common and main idea behind all these systems. Try to capture the audio and video signal as quickly as possible and transfer through the network as fast as possible. Minimize the latency that is spent within the computer. Also, try to use transfer protocol that may result in lower latency or lower jitter within the network. There are 2 types of systems: those based on peer-to-peer streaming, which do not require a centralized server to receive and distribute or broadcast the audio and video streams, or those based on centralized and professional servers. Also within the peer-to-peer streaming categories, we may have one of the computers, one of the nodes, which will act as a server, but this is on a much smaller scale. Within peer-to-peer system, we have solutions to stream audio only, for instance, Jacktrip, Soundjack, Gemidus, Telematic Performance Client, and Musician Link. Jacktrip from Karma at Stanford was probably the first of a kind. It was developed by the Soundwire group, where Soundwire stands for Sound Waves over the Internet for Real-Time Echoes. The 2 key ideas was to use uncompressed audio, so no delay for compression and decompression, and overall better quality, and using UDP protocol instead of the traditional TCP. They achieve in the United States a coast-to-coast sustain full duplex audio connection with a round trip of approximately 75 milliseconds. The group also proposed sonar-like ping techniques to measure the overall round-trip latency of the system. They record a pulse on the microphone of the first room, which will be traveling through the streaming system within the first room, going through the network, received by the streaming system of the second network, reproduced by a loudspeaker, captured back by a microphone into the second room, going back the streaming system once again, going through the network, and then played back by the loudspeaker in the first room. And here we can actually check the delay between the ping, the pulse that we transmitted, and the one that we received back. What is also interesting is that the impulse or the ping that we're receiving back has been reverberating or echoing in the second room, and therefore this one is an interesting opportunity to use this type of solution as a kind of transcontinental echo/delay/reverberation chambers. Another system worth mentioning is WeMust, Wireless Music Studio, from Università Politecnica delle Marche. And this is a tool set that is packed into a customized operating system for the BeagleBoard, a single board computer. And it provides this tool set for live music control and audio signal transmission over both wired and wireless networks. Earlier, I stated that for latency reason, it is better to stay within wires, so avoid wireless. But there are contexts in which wireless is the only viable solution. For instance, think about performing a concert where musicians are placed over different boats in a port. Next, there is an excerpt of Waterfront, played on the 25th of July 2014 at the Acousmatic Festival in Ancona in Italy. There are 3 musicians, a sax player, double bass player, and a vocalist, and they're performing over separate boats. And the wireless music studio is what enabled them to play and interact together in sync. The ultra video conferencing system of McGill is probably one of the earliest examples of peer-to-peer solution including audio and video. It is a sort of high-quality, high-fidelity video conferencing system. The aim was to provide the feeling of being there, wherever there may be, and so using computer networks and the internet. Application included broadcasting of concert, virtual classroom, remote instrument lessons, and online jamming. The earliest trace of this system are dated back in the year 2000, and this software has not been updated anymore since the year 2010, but is still available for free download. Something that I would like to stress here is that a high-quality audio-video streaming system is a necessary but not sufficient condition in order to achieve telepresence, the sense, the feel of being there. The quality of the microphones, the quality of the speakers, of the cameras, of the screens, of the projector, the room, the acoustic of the room, the lights in the room, the positioning of all these components within the room around the players play an essential role in order to generate, in order to provide that feel of telematic presence. So it's not only about the software, but the scope is much larger, the problem is much larger, and it must be addressed in a sort of holistic way. Similar but more recent systems include Jackazam, which allow multi-point connection, so you can play being in more than 2 different locations. This system also provides a tool that estimates the capability of your network. ArtMesh, that provide a complete set of tools for producing network-based events. UltraGrid, which provide the capability to stream with low latency, high-quality video with up to 4K resolution. Lola is a low latency and high-quality audio-video transmission system oriented for network musical performances and interaction that has been developed since several years by the Conservatorio di Musica Giuseppe Tartini from Trieste in Italy, in collaboration with GAR, that is the Italian Research and Academic Network. Lola is a quite well-known system within people that perform music over the network. It has been around for quite some time. And it is not just a software, it's an overall system. It is based on a software, but you need to run it on a specific machine with a certain type of processing power, GPU card for graphical acceleration, and moreover, it relies on reliable, error-free, and symmetric network service that today only the research and education network can provide. Therefore, you won't be able to use this over a normal internet connection. The project Diamuses and the distributed immersive performance system are just two examples of far more complicated setup that we can use to perform music over the network. These are actually proper TV grade or theater grade production, which involve several centralized servers to store and distribute quickly the information across the different nodes in the network, TV broadcasting systems, and so on. If we cannot bring the latency below 25 milliseconds, one option is to learn to play with higher latency, so to cope with this latency. These are approaches that do not require any particular solution, are just playing technique. The master-slave approach is a compromise, and we are stepping back from an idea of musical perfection. One of the musicians keeps track of the rhythm and try to not listen to the incoming and highly delayed signals of the other musicians anymore, so it doesn't listen to the slaves. In this situation, the remote side, the slave, can perfectly play to the incoming signal of the master, since he doesn't care about the response anymore. In general, the role of the master is taken by a rhythmic instrument, and to let the other solo instrument play on its groove in a slave mode. The laid-back approach is based on the laid-back playing manner, which is a common and quite accepted solo style in jazz music. Playing laid-back means to play slightly behind the groove, which musicians often try to achieve consciously in order to make their solo appear more interesting and free. The laid-back approach, of course, doesn't work for unison music, in which both parties have to play exactly on the same beat and at the same time. Besides this, laid-back implies that conscious or artificial delay must not exceed certain limits. Indeed, this approach will work if the delay is somewhere between 25 and 50 milliseconds. These are techniques that can be employed even outside the world of computer network. When we play music, we try to stay as close as possible, but sometimes this is not the case. We have constraints that prevent us for being close to each other. Imagine you want to play music from your balcony with another musician that is on the balcony of the building in front of you. The distance will exceed those 8 to 10 meters that somehow correspond to those 20-25 milliseconds. And taking this approach is a viable solution, which does not require any technological introduction. The delayed feedback approach is appropriate when the distance, the delay, exceeds 25 milliseconds. This approach tries to make musicians feel like playing within the realistic interaction approach, so with a delay very little, below the 25 milliseconds. In order to do this, we need to delay the player own signal artificially. So here we need some tool in order to do this. By principle, delay beyond the 25 milliseconds lead either to the laid-back approach or to the master-slave approach, in which the master hears the slave with a delay equal to the round trip, while the slave has the feeling to play in perfect sync. If we delay the playback of the master, both the master and the slave finally have a closer proximity, so both of them think to be playing in sync. Of course, there's going to be a perception of latency between the master playing action and the sonic response of his instrument. The larger the self-delay, the better the synchronization will be of both signals. The best synchronization can be reached with self-delaying both of them equally to the half of the round trip. Existing tools using this approach are eJamming Audio and Jammer. With the latency accepting approach, we don't try to play anymore synchronously with a fixed tempo with other musicians over the network, but we consciously accept that we have a delay between us. This delay can be far exceeding the 25 milliseconds. So we play with the delay. We take it as an opportunity rather than a problem. And we try to use this delay as an artistic expression. Therefore, this is probably the most avant-gardistic approach that we can think about. In terms of like tools, you can think about using whatever you want, because here the latency, the delay, the synchronization is not anymore a problem. And therefore there's a huge variety. Basically anything that transmits audio and video over the network will do. And probably Quintet.net was one of the earliest framework to consider and to take this approach. Finally, we can take the fake time approach, which normalizes the latency across all players involved in the network music performance, and therefore everyone has the feeling to be playing in sync and very well aligned. Here the assumption is that the network latency exceeds that 25 milliseconds, so it's not possible to do true real-time synchronization, and we're not even trying to play a piece of music that has been written to be played in a certain way, but we're just trying to establish a sort of like jamming environment. To implement this approach, we need technology. We need something in the middle, for instance, a software tool. And the idea is to introduce additional latency so that all participants to the performance receive each other audio output with a delay that is exactly one measure, for instance, 1 bar. This can fit quite well jam session, for instance, of rock or funk music or other genres, in which the same basic groove is often played again over and over without any explicit differences between the current measure and the previous measure. In this context, the fake time approach may satisfy the needs of the musician way better than all the previous approaches that we discussed so far, with the except of the realistic interaction approach, which is the ideal scenario. In terms of delay improvements, the fake time approach is not really a model to follow, simply because we are actually increasing the delay rather than trying to reduce it. In terms of like software solution, a pretty popular one is the Ninjam project, which has been developed by the same group that is behind Reaper, a quite popular digital audio workstation, and the two integrate quite well with each other. Ninjam stands for Novel Intervallic Network Jamming Architecture for music. When using Ninjam, one of the nodes, so one of the user, must act as a server node, and therefore there may be a little bit more pressure in terms of bandwidth on this node. This table and the associated diagram, taken from the work of Kerot and Werner, provide a comparison of all the approaches that we discussed so far. There are different aspects that they consider. The synchronization at the sender, at the receiver, so how is the feeling of playing in sync at the sender and receiver point, the home feel, the general feel across the ensemble, and the possibility of playing unison. Not surprisingly, the realistic interaction approach is the one that provides the best across the spectrum, so the entire row is green. The delayed feedback approach is a good trade-off across the entire spectrum of qualitative measures that they consider. So the entire row is yellow, while all the other approaches provide different type of pro and cons. They also consider the impact of the jitter on the different approaches and what are the recommended distances in terms of kilometers in which these approaches may or may not work. Network music performances provide us with plenty of novel opportunity that we can exploit for artistic or musical purposes. If we simply try to recreate what we do in the physical space, we will probably end up with a suboptimal result. In the physical world, there is a limit to the maximum size of an ensemble, simply because if we are too many, we're going to be distributed over a very large space, and therefore we exceed those 10 to 20 meters, and playing in sync become an issue. But over the network, this is not true anymore. Theoretically, we can involve any number of players and performers. We can also think about unbounded augmentation. So the network transport not only sound, but also control signals. And therefore, as a musician, you can play simultaneously not only one, but a large number of instruments that can be also remote. And this is also a positive point for all those large and bulky instruments that are difficult to transport. The space is virtual, so you can personalize your placement. In real performances, not everyone is happy with their mutual location or with the environmental condition, but within this virtual space, we can make everyone happy, visually and also acoustically. And finally, we can take advantage of the so-called internet acoustic. Maybe we can use a particularly favorable environment, a room that sounds quite well, so we can make use of this room that we like. We can place ourselves into that room, even if we're not physically there. And we can also make several environments become part of a wider and shared acoustic space as a sort of like a global or distributed reverberator. There are many other systems out there that facilitate or support music-related collaboration over computer networks. Here, I just want to mention a couple of them that I find interesting. The first one is the Patchwork, which is a system that allows you to play remotely with a synthesizer of Joe Paradiso, which is currently displayed in the MIT Museum, which is the largest handmade modular synthesizer of all time. This system is composed by a hardware controller and streaming device, which is accessible through a web interface available on the internet, available to the public. Therefore, you can play around, control this synthesizer, and the audio will be streamed to your machine through the browser. The interesting aspect of this work is that you don't need to visit anymore the museum if you want to play around with this legendary machine, and we can extend this approach for playing or performing with instrument or hardware devices that we don't really own, so we can kind of like lease it or rent it over the network for a while. Another interesting system is the seed reader that can be very handy in case you use a music sheet and you are interacting with other musicians over the internet. You can share music sheet. You can annotate the music sheet and your annotation will be visible also on the remote device. You can point at particular part of the music sheet, and there are dedicated modalities for directors, performer, teachers, and so on. The advent of broadband access to the internet has really sparked an interest in all these technologies. Researchers in this broad and multidisciplinary field are still active, and they are moving into different directions. We are looking at technical improvements of the network, of the architecture, of the telecommunication protocol, hardware, signal processing, and software. Other work are mostly focused on the user and on the use that we can do of this kind of technology, ranging from composition performance, involving the audience, establishing different type of orchestras, and providing multimodal and immersive environment. Investigation in network-related psychoacoustic and in general human perception are also very important, because in order to shape the technology, we need to understand how we'll perceive this technology, how we perceive this system. User study are also very important. Understanding the experience on a broad range of application from the user will help us to make this better. And we should not forget also the philosophical approach, the conceptual, the aesthetic of this. We're still talking about music that is a form of art. Last but not least, education and pedagogical aspects are also being investigated. We can think about these technologies for teaching music remotely, but this is not only the case. We can also use them for teaching other subjects that are not related to music. Using high quality and low latency audio and video streaming can be extremely beneficial to provide a better sense of presence also for normal classroom teaching. In terms of technology research, there are a lot of hot topics that are related to network music performances. Think about tracking and predicting technology, probably based on machine learning or more in general, artificial intelligence. Can we predict the bit of information that was missing due to network delay or jitter or so on? Motion tracking is also something else that is very relevant to capture the motion of players and conductor. Network score, how to distribute the score in a more efficient way, or dedicated network transfer protocol, so some more real-time network transfer protocol without sticking to the UDP or TCP, or a hardware data packetization. So rather than doing this in software, doing it with dedicated hardware, so the probably FPGA. Audio codec, or also audio and video codec that provide very low latency, and also techniques for transmitting clocks and master clocks so that we can keep a very tight synchronization across all the audio equipment and system and instrument that we use within performances. Since we will never win the battle versus latency, latency will be there all the time, it is also very important to understand how the performers, the user, the musician respond to latency, what has a positive or negative impact. We've been talking extensively about playing in sync. Studies have observed that when the ensemble try to play in sync, very often end up accelerating or decelerating the tempo. Somehow we discover which delays determine an acceleration, which may determine an acceleration, and also other parameters such as descriptors of the timbre, the attack time, the spectral flatness, the brightness, what is their relationship with this acceleration or deceleration of the tempo. Moreover, trained musicians are more sensitive to the latency, and they show a more pronounced deceleration of the overall tempo with respect to musicians that are less trained. We don't have yet a massive amount of study. We don't have yet studies that show what is the long-term adaptation to this new environment. And it would be very interesting to see, for instance, how a musician that has been trained over the network will react to this environment that today we may find unusual or strange or completely novel. At the Norwegian University of Science and Technology and at the University of Oslo, we recently launched an international joint master program in music, communication, and technology. This is not the usual music technology master. Music is at the core, but the scope is much larger. This program presents very unique settings. The cohort of students and the teachers are distributed over 2 campuses, one in Trondheim and one in Oslo, which are 500 kilometers apart. We work together on a daily basis through the portal, which is actually a virtual space composed by 2 physical rooms in the 2 campuses, which are nearly permanently connected. The portal rooms present several technologies for network music performances that has been discussed during this presentation. Studying, using, further developing, experimenting, comparing, and pushing the boundaries of this technology is an integral part of the curriculum of this program. Students can also experiment the integration with other disciplines or topics, for instance, motion tracking, machine learning, sonification, and spatial audio. The aim is to provide students with a very rich set of skills, ranging from computer science and technology, going all the way to humanities, what we call the technological humanist, capable of solving problems of musical nature, but also of non-musical nature. The particular settings of this program provide the students with hard and soft skills to work in geographically distributed teams, even on complex challenges. The work produced by the students across all courses within this master program is usually published on a student-led blog, the MCT blog. It may be particularly interesting to visit the portal section of this blog, in which students propose innovative ideas, describe their techniques that they use, comparison of the existing system, techniques to measure latency, microphone, technique to compare cameras, and all their reflection on what they learn through continuous working and experimentation in these network music performance-like settings. This is a list of recommended readings. Most of them has been also cited throughout this video. And on this webpage, you find a more comprehensive set of resources ranging from software application tools, techniques, and tutorials that you may further explore if you're interested in this topic. Thanks for listening.